Well, a Utah father took his three young children on what prosecutors are now calling an ill prepared and extremely dangerous hike into the mountains east of Salt Lake City, Utah. Now, hours later, two children were unconscious from hypothermia. One appeared dead. And when rescuers arrived, they said that Micah Smith's story didn't match what the investigators later uncovered. And according to the indictment, Smith continued to push on even at the complaints of his children, despite rain, fog, wind, and children repeatedly begging to go home. And then he had to teach his 8-year-old daughter CPR because he knew help was too far away. I want to examine the root, the behavior, the marital strains, the mental health indicators, a previous suicide related encounter, and the troubling allegations that prosecutors are laying out in the case against Micah Smith. Well, hey, everybody. Today we're heading back into my old stomping grounds, the Wasatch Mountains, just east of Salt Lake County, Utah, a place where a father and his three young children went on what was first described as a miracle survival story, but it evolved into something far darker, something that investigators, when they slowed down and looked at, said it was criminal. It isn't just about a dangerous hike gone wrong. According to the indictment that was filed in court, this was a 9-mile push into steep, cold, stormy territory. He took his children, a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and an 8-year-old, despite multiple warnings from the weather, and he forced these kids to climb the summit. Even his own wife argued against it. Now, prosecutors say that Smith admitted that the trip was not well planned, that he knew he was going to be hiking in the dark, and that his children were crying, afraid, and failing physically as he kept pushing them along. I want to walk through all of it: the trail, the weather, the timeline, the marital dynamics, the mental health concerns, the emergency response, and the judge's actions since Smith was arrested. And because this is profiling evil, we're going to go behind the behavior. We're going to talk about the stress, the ego, the fear, the crises that might have driven this father to put his kids in mortal danger on top of that mountain. So take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button, and share Profiling Evil with your friends. And thanks for giving us a thumbs up. And by the way, if you're a Profiling Evil channel member, you're getting this content a day before anybody else. And if you're not a channel member, consider joining. And the links you're going to find down below. Now, to get started, let's ground ourselves geographically before we talk about behavior. And in this case, what sounds like criminal behavior. Big Cottonwood Canyon is one of the steepest, fastest changing mountain environments in Utah. You can leave Salt Lake City in a t-shirt and be in a hailstorm, in fog or freezing wind 20 minutes later. And the trail that Smith took his kids on climbs right up into some of the most exposed basins on top of that mountain. In fact, to give you an idea of how high these peaks are, just 2 years ago, one of the ski resorts up that canyon received nearly 800 inches of snow. That's 67 feet of snow. And for those of you outside of the U.S., 20 meters of snow. Now, the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office search and rescue deputies remarked that the area was not recommended for beginning hikers, let alone toddlers. And remember, these children that Smith took along with him were 2 years old, 4 years old, and 8 years old. The route that Smith took the children on totaled about 9 miles, with roughly 6.6 of those miles going uphill, more than 3,000 feet of elevation gain. And to put that in perspective, That's roughly 2/3 of the distance from the Garnerneck cogwheel to the top of Zermatt, Switzerland. Maps, terrain models, and slope analysis all reinforce that this wasn't a stroll. It was a sustained climb into high alpine terrain, a place where mistakes are magnified, where the weather turns deadly in minutes. And this matters because this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Choices like this are amplified by environment, and Smith chose the environment for his three tiny kids. The date was October 11th, and Micah Smith left his home with his children around 9 o'clock in the morning. He told police they stopped at a store to get more socks and shoes, arriving at the trailhead around 10 a.m. He said they were making good time early on. Then the weather shifted, and soon they were enveloped with rain, mist, fog, and hail. Smith would admit to investigators that they attempted to find shelter several times. They tried to get behind logs and under trees, even building makeshift shelters from branches and rocks. But remember, these are a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And he acknowledged in the probable cause narrative that was released by the county that the day was spontaneous and not well planned. For even a seasoned hiker, that's a red flag. But for a father with a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, and an 8-year-old, it was a catastrophic decision from the moment it began. But Smith's voice isn't the voice that I really am caring about on this thing. It was the indictment that captured the voices of the children that I think is most compelling in this story. You see, one thing I've learned across decades of working cases like this is that kids will tell the truth about what their bodies were feeling long before adults will admit danger. And according to page 4 of the indictment, Smith told investigators that the children were crying, they were cold, they were complaining, they were fussy. But then he would throw in things like they were excited and playing games. And I'm sure that all of this might have been the case in the early moments of the hike. But the last comment seems like Smith was minimizing the distress that the kids were going through.
Mike, your thoughts, first of all, about how bad of an idea was it? And those storms that come in, take something that's dangerous and make it potentially deadly.
Well, yes. I mean, even without hindsight, it's a bad idea to go up there with anyone that's not physically fit. I remember as a young scout, 12 to 16, 17 years old, hiking that as a group. It was grueling. To do that with a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, an 8-year-old is unconscionable. Even given the facts that you might have some low capacity in making good decisions. I just don't know, Vinny, how anyone could come up with an idea that makes good sense. You and I have been in Park City together. That's 7,000 feet. The top of these peaks in that area are 11,000 feet. They were doing a 3,000 foot ascent just on that particular trail alone. I mean, you think about this, 6+ miles that were almost straight uphill. It just is beyond me. It's troubling. It's really terrifying to think that there are people out there in a position of trust making decisions like this. Smith also said that his 8-year-old daughter even expressed fear when the clouds rolled in, asking her father if they were something bad. And he told her they were just clouds and they were kind of cool. But for me, the most chilling details appeared later in a video that Smith took, which was recovered by investigators, wherein the 8-year-old is recorded asking, "Daddy, are we going to freeze to death?" Now think about Smith's earlier comment that the kids were playing games and having fun. That comment doesn't come from a child who's playing games or having fun. That comes from a child who's trying to make sense of real perceived danger. Then, based on Smith's own account and based on comments from search and rescue personnel and their timeline, the family reached a point where they were roughly 600 feet below the summit. Now, they were in worsening weather, somewhere in the late afternoon and early evening. And let me point out again that Mount Superior on the summit in Big Cottonwood Canyon is at an elevation of 11,050 feet. Now, this is where the indictment shows prosecutorial focus, and they say that Smith was fully aware that his children were exhausted, that the weather was deteriorating, and that nightfall was approaching. And yet, he said, "We're nearly to the top. We're going to push on." Well, at some point in the hike, one of the children reportedly fell down and received a head injury. The head injury is bad enough that when rescuers finally reached the group, they actually believed that that child was dead. Now, I'm unsure if it's the same child, but I think it is. But the fall was severe enough that trained rescuers thought they had a fatality on their hands. Now, according to the indictment, Smith also admitted to police that he could see the weather moving in. And that's when his daughter expressed fear, asking him multiple times if they could turn back. But they continued upward. Now, I believe that single behavioral choice will be the heart of this case in court, because the indictment includes detailed summaries of damning evidence in the form of text messages that were going on between Smith and his wife throughout the afternoon and evening. And keep in mind, Smith's wife was at home. Now, according to page 5 of the indictment, Smith told his wife that the weather was just clouds. He said that she was scared by what she was seeing, speaking of the child, and so they started hiking down the mountain. But Smith replied that he was comfortable hiking in the dark without lights. Later, after pleading with him, the wife became more stern, demanding that he get the children home. That was at 6:41 p.m. And she sent a one-word text after hours of not hearing from him, only saying, "Well?" Well, these texts represent the words of a mother who knew something was going very wrong. And behaviorally, the text exchange showed two varying mindsets going on. A parent who was at home perceiving danger clearly, and a parent who was on the mountain minimizing danger and pushing forward. The goal to get to the top of the mountain. And that tension is central to understanding the motive and the state of mind of people involved in this case. But one of the most disturbing elements came from the indictment and Smith's instructing his 8-year-old daughter on how to do CPR, because by that time he knew that that child was dying. Now, according to page 3, Smith told detectives that when the younger son became unresponsive, he started doing CPR. And then he taught his daughter how to perform compressions and blow into her brother's mouth in case she needed to keep him alive, while Smith left them all seeking help.
Yeah, the logic, Mike, was coming from the 8-year-old daughter.
Yeah. Isn't that terrifying to think that that child had to be the adult in the group trying to provide some kind of reasoning? And it's really making me wonder what kind of a disconnect was going on with Dad. And when we talk maybe a little further about this in the episode tonight, we'll talk a little bit about those texts that were going on and the behavior that I was picking up as I looked at that. Again, can you imagine a child being taught on a mountain when it's 20 degrees and raining, that they're taught, hey, this is how you do CPR on your brother, and I'll catch you later because I'm heading down the hill to try to get some help. It just makes absolutely no sense. Let that sit in for a moment. An 8-year-old alone on a freezing mountain in the dark, and she's trying to keep her little brother alive by performing CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. If a jury hears this as the prosecutors have framed it, I think it's going to be one of the most emotionally powerful pieces of evidence in this case that's going to unfold. And if you didn't catch the teaser that I let out, Smith left his children alone on the mountain to go and find help. Now, this is where GIS would certainly come in, because with current day technology, it would allow emergency communication centers to get GPS locations off of those mobile devices in emergencies. I mean, even from texts, They could map out the location of these mobile transactions, and 911 centers could have gotten people there more quickly. They could have considered the terrain and the slope and how the search and rescue people should respond. But I want to go back to that little 8-year-old girl for a moment, given chest compressions and mouth to mouth, all alone at almost 11,000 feet in 20-degree weather. Well, when deputies found the children, they discovered that they were unsheltered. They were suffering from severe hypothermia, and one child required CPR for more than 25 minutes, while another lay dying with a body core temperature of 62 degrees Fahrenheit. This wasn't survivable for very long. And frankly, it was a miracle that the children were found alive. Now, 2 of the rescuers were brave and they were skilled enough that they could climb that mountain and save these children's lives. Investigators reconstructed the day and they conclude that Smith repeatedly chose to move upward, to ignore the weather warnings, to misrepresent the conditions to his wife through text messages, and to push children who were cold and crying to try to reach the summit. He also left them remaining in the dark without lighting. And he tells investigators that the hike was spontaneous. This combination is heavily emphasized in the probable cause section, which plainly stated that Smith's behavior placed the children in grave danger, that it was intentional and selfish, that it demonstrated that he was a danger to his children and to the community. And again, all of this is paraphrasing based on the indictment's wording, but it reflects the document accurately, in my opinion. And keep in mind that the indictment doesn't stop there. The hike was one problem. The neglect and abuse was another problem. But the state included 2 major prior incidents to show escalating danger. Number one, that Smith would later trespass at a local children's hospital and interfere with one of his children's care, including tampering with medical equipment. Then the indictment laid out that Smith had also been charged with prior domestic violence charges. The prosecution was concluding that Smith's behavior was a spiraling, out of control man, that he was involved in dangerous decision-making, that he disregarded his children's physical safety, and he interfered with their medical care after the fact. The state argued that Smith was a risk to the children and to himself, and they pled with the court to keep him in custody until the trial. And I want to play that segment because it was really important. So let's go to court when he argued to be released from jail.
As you are aware, our office filed multiple charges against one Micah Smith, multiple counts of child torture, as well as multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. The search and rescue teams were contacted, and it pertained to the defendant with 3 children, the ages of 2, 4, and 8 years of age. They encountered children in different stages of harm, including 2 of the younger children who had fallen down and taken some head trauma, including one who had stopped breathing. This is not an easy hike. This is one that even as trained professionals, they suffered injury trying to respond to it. The other part that was really critical to us was not only that the children were afraid, but as was indicated by the older child, that she had to try to do CPR to try to save her brother, and to also to continue to go through that experience where she communicated fear and concern, and they were told to march on. This is about the emotional and psychological harm that can be
Judge
caused.
Ruby Mills. So, sir, no in-person, no telephonic, no electronic, no written contact. You may not go where they live or go to school. You may not have anyone else contact them for you, so no passing messages to them through anyone else. And you may not possess a weapon or any kind of ammunition while this case is pending. Mr. Smith, do you understand those expectations that I've laid out for you?
Yes, Your Honor, I do.
Okay, I will sign this order now. A copy will be served upon you at the jail. Mr. Smith, please make sure you talk to your lawyer about what this protective order means and how you can address it with your judge.
Okay, Your Honor. I
All
was
right.
wondering if you might consider a pre-release for me.
Let's see. Mr. Ross, what is the state's position on a request for a pretrial supervised release?
That's a hard no, Your Honor. I haven't had an opportunity to bring the victim to weigh in on this, and I direct the court to the declaration of probable cause. There's a significant safety risk, and a no bail warrant is absolutely appropriate.
Okay. Mr. Smith, I did have a chance to read through the charging document before the hearing today. I read it when it was first filed, and then I reminded myself of its contents this morning. There is substantial evidence to support the charges in this case, Mr. Smith, and I do find by a clear and convincing standard that you would be a danger to the alleged victims if you were released today. Now, that's not a permanent decision, Mr. Smith. It's a temporary one, and it can be reviewed as soon as your next hearing in front of Judge Ruby Mills. But, sir, you will remain in custody until that detention hearing and until Judge Ruby Mills decides to release you. Your court date with her for that detention hearing will be December 8th at 9 a.m. So that's next Monday, Mr. Smith. That gives you a limited window of time in which to talk to your attorney. So my strong suggestion for you is that you reach out to them starting tomorrow afternoon. Get a hold of the lawyer who's been assigned to your case so they can go through the facts of the case with you and answer your questions.
Okay, Your Honor.
Mr. Smith, do you have any questions about anything we've talked about here today? But before you do that, I will caution you, do not tell me anything about the facts of the case, what did or did not happen on the day in question.
Yes, Your Honor. Is there anything that I can do to help show that I'm not a danger or threat?
Okay. Well, Mr. Smith, that's an excellent discussion for you to have with your lawyer. At this stage of the proceedings, there's not anything further for us to decide. I've made my decisions in the case today, but like I said, you will have the chance to review those decisions in front of Judge Ruby Mills, and your lawyer can help you do that. So keep in contact with them, make sure you follow their advice and give them all the information they need.
Now, I think the ruling makes sense, not only for the safety of the children and Smith's wife, but for Smith himself, because clearly there are indications of mental health challenges, which leads me to the next segment of this little discussion. I want to talk about what might be going on in Micah Smith's mind then and now. I want to kind of explore whether he was angry with his wife, because the text while he was on that mountain with his children give us a clue. If you remember, Smith says it's tough with 3 children and no second parent in his texts. Well, that's not an objective report. That's a jab back at mom. It's resentment surfacing while his children are in danger. Resentment is a behavioral red flag when paired with risky decision making. And it leaves me wondering if this was an attempt to punish his spouse. In these family annihilation cases, research shows that when partners are in conflict, some partners will hurt children in order to hurt the other spouse. And I'm not saying that's the case here, but investigators are going to have to examine it and consider it as they analyze the marital strain, the daily stressors, the arguments they were having, and maybe even the financial pressures they were under. They need to look at Smith's mental health instability and any domestic violence issues very closely. Now, there's also an indication that there are some spillovers into some suicidal thoughts. Now, this is important. The indictment doesn't explicitly include the suicidal ideation that occurred earlier, but it fits what's publicly being reported, that his behavior was a troubling pattern where Smith would take risks alone in the mountains, even talking about death or suicide. Now, media reports suggest that he was behaving impulsively during moments of stress leading up to this, including things like his comment during the hike of being comfortable hiking in the dark. These elements might indicate some cognitive distortion that was going on. And some experts say that's a hallmark of suicidal crises. It doesn't excuse his behavior, but it helps explain why a parent might ignore overwhelming evidence of danger. Now, I also find myself wondering if this was some form of a grandiose way of seeking identity, because his phrasing of words like once in a lifetime hike, or his insistence on pushing to the top as the weather closed in, can reflect poor judgment, an overpowering ego, or a need for thrill seeking without considering consequences. Prosecutors will likely use this interpretation to frame the hike as purposeful endangerment.
Mike, I'm wondering, right? We're all fathers here. Like, how does this compute in any level? There has to be some level of severe mental impairment / evil. It's one or the other, Mike.
Exactly, and I look at the text messages back and forth, that remark about I'm doing this as a single parent up here, I'm handling this alone. That wasn't a realization that things are falling apart. To me, that was a personal jab being fired back, and an indication that there was some real anger about having to go up there. We've seen it before in familial kinds of domestic violence, where somebody purposely injures the children in order to hurt the other spouse. And I'm not saying that's what's going on here, but I think it has to be considered by law enforcement and by the prosecution, and hopefully by the mental health providers who are talking to this guy. And the flip side of it is that maybe it was just a mental health breakdown, but there were precipitating kinds of stressors suggesting that this wasn't the first time. There's evidence suggesting that there had been other kinds of ideological thoughts about going up into the mountains and doing some things that are pretty aggressive. That all is really troubling to me, Vinny. And you know what? Even if it was mental illness, and we got to lean on the side of being a little bit compassionate about the father making a really bad decision in a mental health crisis, that's got to be one heck of a crisis to take a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, and an 8-year-old and make them climb up a mountain that, frankly, most of us wouldn't even want to attempt it in our best condition.
Yeah, and Jason, Mike brings up a great point about a big part of the investigation may be what else was going on inside that household.
Oh, exactly. Because either there's a history of abuse or a history of mental illness, and the wife and other family members are going to have some experience and some input to that to help law enforcement decide whether this was gross negligence or if it was some kind of intentional act.
You know, everything I've mentioned so far on Micah Smith is pretty dang negative. So to be fair, I have to ask myself if this could truly be an accident, or could Micah Smith be a victim of all of this too? Is it possible that he was having a mental health crisis and that tossed out his ability to recognize the dangers? These are the kinds of things that I think the defense team's going to focus on and the prosecution has to consider. But the indictment's details make that argument harder the deeper you go. You know, I love maps, and I think this is going to be a GIS goldmine for prosecutors. And I expect them to use 3D terrain models of the canyon with weather overlays from that day. I think they're going to be able to show the terrain and the route traveled and how dangerous it was for more experienced hikers, let alone children. And all of this, I think, will help the jury connect the dots between behavior and outcome. So in my opinion, here are the key issues to track in this case. Number one is Smith's mental health evaluation, where the defense will undoubtedly argue diminished capacity. But that still doesn't absolve him completely from all of the charges. They're going to need to examine the digital forensics, things like the locations from his phone, the photos, the videos, the texts. And they're going to conduct forensic interviews of the children, where they'll get a much clearer picture of the children's perspective of what happened on that mountain. I think this case is going to go on for some time, and I'm going to continue to break down the case step by step on Court TV with Vinny Politan. We're going to be watching the hearings as they develop, and like you, I'm going to be watching the motions roll in, the mental health evaluations and arguments, and how everything emerges and how it's associated with this disturbing case. Here's the thing that I keep going back to is that there has to be accountability, and the accountability has to match the behavior, not what the outcome was, because he shouldn't get credit for a miracle that happened on that mountain. And I think equally important that the patterns before that single day also need to be taken into account, because as we see these kind of multiple factors stacking up, we don't want to treat it as a one-off. We've got to be able to look at whether this was an escalating problem and whether it's something that has been repeatable. We've talked about it before, Vinny. Past behavior is predictive of future behavior. And so I guess I go back to the idea of let the system roll out, but let the process roll out, but you got to have accountability. I hope you'll join me for the future discussions that we have. And I want to thank you for being here as we talk about the Micah Smith case. Now, if you found this to be helpful, please hit the like and subscribe button and ring the bell so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. And remember that you can check out Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and even TikTok. And if you like audio podcasts and getting your true crime fix on the go, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. I am thrilled to be part of the new Gamut Podcast Network for all of our audio podcasts going forward. And I hope that you'll subscribe to my new podcast, Gardens of Evil, Inside the Zion Society Cult, which is going to drop on the American Nightmares feed on February 3rd on Gamut. The links are down below. And remember, you can always find more content on profilingevil.com, where you can also sign up for our digital newsletter, The Bolo. And don't forget to join me on Court TV as we follow this case and others like it. And please remember that behind each of these indictments, like in this case, there are real families, first responders, and victims whose lives are forever changed. Let's honor them by seeking the truth and not spinning things out of control, by being thoughtful and staying engaged. I'm Mike King, and this is Profiling Evil. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.